In the heritage boot world, Viberg seems to have become polarizing. Some people say it has become too expensive. It has betrayed its roots. I'd like to tell you my opinion, how Viberg is still essentially a work boot company, but reinterpreted through the lens of luxury craftsmanship. G'day, welcome back to Bootlosophy, and my name is Tech. I'm working on Gallop here in Perth, Kalyakul Wajak Nongabuja. Now these are my Viberg boots. This one is the classic plain toe service boot in brown chrome XL on the 2030 last, which I bought from my friend Ellie, who is the Heritage Tribute on Instagram. This other one is a brogue cap toe service boot, also on the 2030 last in oiled cullata leather in a colorway called Husk. This third one here is their Halkett boot on the 2020 last in Charles F. Stead's Janus calf suede, and it's in a colorway called Flint. I only have 3 pairs of Vibergs because, although I would like more, they're kind of pricey. They were pricey when I bought them, and they have increased in price since. If you want to see how pricey and maybe what value that might bring to you, I've left the link to their website below. While I have often said in my videos that if you want a Viberg service boot, a fine alternative would be a Parkhurst Allen or Richmond. You get the same design and look for mid-US $400, but even as an avid Parkhurst fan, objectively, I can't compare the finessed quality of a Viberg against the Parkhurst finish, as good as that is. In increasing prices, some would say beyond the reach of normal boot enthusiasts, Viberg are said to have gone too far. Their strategy is polarizing. But in my opinion, and in this video, I will try to express a management consultant's view of why Viberg have implemented a strategy that bases its success on transforming a utilitarian work boot pattern into a refined heritage icon, without entirely abandoning its industrial roots. The modern service boot is essentially a work boot, reinterpreted through the lens of luxury craftsmanship. Now, long-time viewers will know that in my real life off YouTube, I am a 45-year experienced management consultant working across the UK, the US, Australia, and Asia, working with clients on strategic development and strategic planning. So, as in my video about the pricing of Alden Indies, I thought I'd take you through a ride of Viberg's history and their developing strategy from the POV of a business management consultant. So this is a different video. It's not a boot review as such, but an examination of a heritage boot brand. Let's set the context with some history of the founding of Viberg. Now, Viberg was founded in 1931 by Edwin Viberg, a Swedish immigrant to Canada. The company began in Saskatchewan originally, producing durable boots for farmers and workers during the Great Depression. The company's earliest boots were designed strictly as functional work footwear, emphasizing durability and repairability rather than aesthetics. Early models used a simple nailed-down construction, allowing soles to be replaced easily with minimal tools, which is important in remote industrial environments. By the mid-20th century, Viberg had shifted west across the resource industries and towards them in British Columbia. As logging expanded across the Pacific Northwest, the company supplied boots to loggers and forestry workers, eventually relocating operations to Victoria in British Columbia, where the factory remains today. At this stage in the 20th century, Viberg's identity was aligned with Pacific Northwest work boot makers, similar to companies that still exist, such as White's Boots and Wesco, brands known for heavy stitch-down boots built for logging, lineman work, and industrial labor. Key characteristics of Viberg during this era included the use of heavy leather uppers and thick soles, functional work lasts with large toe boxes, resolable and repairable construction in either nail-down or the rapidly more popular stitch-down methods of construction. Their sales were primarily through workwear retailers and industrial supply channels, and at that time, the brand had little presence in fashion or lifestyle markets. Ironically, Viberg's later transformation centered on a pattern that had existed since the company's earliest years. The service boot was originally developed in the 1930s as a farmer's work boot inspired by military ankle boot patterns common across many armies in the early 20th century. The 1930s service boot looked different from these in my collection. Their design was relatively simple: ankle height derby pattern, simple backstay and heel counter, plain toe, and constructed with durability in mind. At the time, it was simply one of many practical work boots that Viberg produced. Decades later, however, this design would become the foundation of the company's reinvention, and I'll come to that. As is often the case in very old generational companies, a turning point in product development and corporate strategy often happens when a new generation takes over more and more control. Third generation family member Brett Viberg spent time in Japan in around 2006 to 2007. While there, he observed heritage fashion, particularly American workwear and military clothing, gaining a cult following in Japan. During this period, Viberg began selling to Japanese retailers and collectors interested in authentic North American heritage goods. In country, Brett Viberg recognized that the company's historical designs could be repositioned for a premium heritage market rather than industrial workwear. Even if the North American market couldn't see it, the rest of the world was lapping it up, and a gulf was developing in those markets between the rough and ready heritage of Red Wings and the heritage but finessed products of Viberg. This insight fundamentally altered Viberg's trajectory and became, I feel, a turning point for their strategy. Instead of competing solely with industrial bootmakers, Viberg began moving toward a global niche of high-end heritage footwear. Following on from this change in strategy around 2008, Brett Viberg introduced the service boot as a central product, but with several important updates from that original 1930s pattern. The use of stitch-down construction instead of purely nail-down methods. A sleeker profile designed to appeal beyond workwear. The loss of a sprung toe. The introduction of new lasts, particularly the 2030 last, with a narrower almond-shaped toe rather than the traditional bump toe that's used in work boots. As you can see, this plain toe service boot looks like it may have come from the Second World War, but there's something not quite right. It's just a little too sleek and slim. It is a modernized version of heritage. This 2030 last became the defining visual signature of modern Viberg boots. The company also began experimenting with more fashion-oriented choices, more options that might appeal less to a forestry worker and more to a boot collector, or to people who might want a heritage boot to wear with heritage fashions. They started playing with unstructured toe boxes, even slimmer proportions like on this Halkett on the 2020 last, and increasingly more refined finishing, specifically on their stitching, not only on the patterns of the uppers where the stitches are close, precise, and clean, but also increasingly fine double row stitching on the stitch down with incredibly high stitches per inch and the sanding of the edge closer and closer to the stitches. I have said in my P&W boots reviews, like on the White's MP boots, how the midsole is often treated as a raft and the edges are wide and almost uncaringly wider than the uppers. That can't be said of these. They look more and more like the finely produced UK boots coming out of Northampton. And therein lies a clue to what I will come to. And yet, within that finessed finish, they still use handcrafted methods. Stitch-down construction, heavyweight leathers. This Chrome XL is as thick as CXL used by other P&W brands and certainly thicker than the CXL used in mid-range boots. From what I've seen, the quality of clicking is intense, and Horween must have a high frequency of rejected hides and selling to Viberg. The evolving result is that they created a boot that still retained work boot durability, but look significantly more elegant. The early 2010s saw Viberg intentionally, strategically, transition from a regional work boot maker into a global heritage brand. A number of influential menswear retailers began carrying Viberg boots from the 2010s, including Freeman Sporting Club, Tate & Yoko, and European retailers such as Manufactum. American heritage stores like Division Road rushed to produce collaborations, much in the same way as Alden collaborates with its retailers. Increasingly, these stores commissioned exclusive makeups, including the introduction of premium leathers and design variations in these exclusive collaborations. A key moment occurred when Viberg produced its first shell cordovan service boots for Manufactum, moving the brand into the highest tier of footwear material. Shell cordovan boots often sold for over $1,000 even back in the 2010s, establishing Viberg a toehold in a price bracket previously associated with high-end European shoemakers. Having dipped their toe in the water, as it were, and as Viberg's reputation grew, the company increasingly used leathers from elite tanneries such as Horween's shell cordovan, Shinki Hikaku's Japanese horsebutt, and Charles F. Stead from the UK's suedes, shrunken exotic suedes, and roughouts. This emphasis on very high-end materials mirrored the strategy of premium shoemakers like John Lobb and Edward Green, Stefano Bema, Carmina, and Belluti. The result was a product positioned between rugged work boots for their construction methods and high-end dress footwear for their finish and materials. This meant that by the end of the decade and up to today, modern Viberg boots feature several refinements not typical of traditional Pacific Northwest work boots. They used sleeker lasts like the 2030, the 2020, and the 1035. They increasingly achieve tighter stitch density. They use heavier weight premium leather selections. Their design profiles lean more and more to the dressy. They exploited boutique collaborations and seasonal releases, yet each pair still requires 200 plus production steps in the Victoria factory, reflecting a hybrid of industrial machinery and traditional craftsmanship. The resulting product often sits in a grey area between rugged and refined, appealing to enthusiasts of heritage menswear. Over roughly 2 decades, Viberg effectively moved through 3 identities. First, the industrial work boot maker from their foundation to the 1990s, servicing the Pacific Northwest labor market, making heavy boots for forestry and trades. Then from 2008 or so to the mid-2010s, they became a heritage revival brand for the wider and more international market. This was the period of rediscovery of archival designs, particularly the service boot. From the late 2010s to the present, they evolved yet again into a global luxury heritage footwear label. In this period, they increasingly used premium materials, expanded boutique distribution, and clearly increased prices to match their new corporate profile. I'll talk more about this in a minute. So this transformation reflects broader trends in fashion around the world, as seen in the Heritage Americana revival over the late 2000s and into the 2010s, and arguably to today, which is why you're watching a channel on heritage boots and interested in raw denim jeans and wax trucker jackets. The trend is there. The Japanese influence on workwear culture simply jump-started this trend, which was picked up in Southeast Asia, note Bandung, then mainland Asia, Europe, and then the United States. These fashion trends have increasingly overlapped between workwear and luxury goods, a root cause of the polarity of Viberg's strategy. The original market, the loggers, the manual blue-collar workers, the forestry and outdoor workers, felt a betrayal by Viberg. A tool of theirs has been sold out and is looking at the larger and globally wider men's heritage fashion market. They feel left out because of the price increases and to them, the unnecessary finessing of construction that the likes of Whites and Nicks have never felt the need to do. Even people like myself, I'm not a forestry worker, but an admirer of durably built heritage goods. feel the slipping away of a potentially grail boot as it becomes an European luxury brand as prices increase. Viberg has chosen its primary target market, that's a business term, and it's not Karl Moravsky, it's not Tech O. Over the past decade, Viberg's pricing has increased significantly as the brand repositioned itself in the trajectory that I laid out. Early heritage era service boots, when they were first reintroduced, were roughly $600 to $700. Typical modern service boots today are around $1,000. Shell Cordovan versions can be upwards of $2,000. These prices place Viberg today alongside premium Northampton footwear brands such as Edward Green, John Lobb, and Crockett & Jones. So to conclude this business eye view of Viberg's strategic corporate transformation, where to for the original work boot buyer? Where to for the heritage boot admirer or even collector? A recurring discussion among enthusiasts is whether Viberg still represents Pacific Northwest boot-making tradition or whether it has effectively repositioned itself closer to European luxury shoemaking. And do they still represent value? The brand objectively retains elements of its work boot DNA. It maintains the stitch-down construction methods of bootmaking. They still use thick leather uppers of a particular quality compared to mid-range brands. And they offer, silly I know, rugged outsole options. But in design aesthetics, pricing, and materials, Viberg increasingly occupies a space closer to the world of Northampton footwear. So do they still represent value? Now, this is actually a nuanced question, and the answer depends on what kind of value you mean. Durability, craftsmanship, design, or price to performance. Historically, Viberg boots offered strong value because they were true work boots priced similarly to other Pacific Northwest makers. But the brand's repositioning toward a luxury heritage market has dramatically changed that equation. As a result, we as buyers must be aware, we just have to have in our minds, that Viberg is no longer competing primarily with work boot companies and rugged bootmaker companies like White's or Wesco or Nix. Instead, it sits a lot closer to premium heritage or luxury footwear brands like the UK Northampton brands. In the shift, Viberg still offers several genuine strengths. Viberg use some of the most respected leathers in the world from some of the most respected tanneries in the world, and they demand the best selections from them. These materials are expensive and difficult to work with, contributing to the high price, but also to the boot's longevity and patina potential, which we're going to have to admit that objectively. Each pair of Viberg boots involves more than 200 production steps, combining machinery, sure, with traditional shoemaking techniques. Their stitch-down construction is particularly robust and still offers excellent water resistance, structural durability, and recraftability. This type of construction is labor-intensive and relatively uncommon in dress-leaning footwear. One of Viberg's strongest value arguments is durability. Because the boot can be resold multiple times, a pair can last at least 10 to 15 years or more with proper maintenance. When spread over a long period of ownership, the annual cost can be surprisingly reasonable. A $1,000 boot lasting 15 years costs $67 a year. A cheaper $200 boot that lasts 2 years averages at $100 a year. From this perspective, once you view a pair of Vibergs as an investment rather than a sunk cost purchase, Viberg can still be economically rational for heavy wearers. However, where their value proposition weakens are the strong arguments that Viberg's price increases have outpaced functional improvements. Once boots reach a certain level of quality, additional improvements become mostly aesthetic rather than structural. Many competitors produce well-built service boots at much lower prices, like my comment about Parker's boots. While Viberg may offer more refined finishing or unique leathers, the functional difference can be relatively small compared with a large price gap. In other words, Viberg is now operating in a zone of diminishing marginal returns. Some buyers argue that when boots exceed $1,000, expectations shift dramatically. At that price range, people are more critical of leather grain consistency, panel mismatching, and cosmetic irregularities that don't actually affect durability, but they feel unacceptable at luxury prices. These concerns highlight the tension between variations due to their handmade nature and luxury price expectations. These are not the main concerns for a $400 boot, nor for a ruggedly built Knicks boot. Ultimately, Viberg's strongest value may not be purely technical. The brand occupies a very specific niche using a work boot construction combined with dress shoe refinement made in North America with distinctive profiles like the 2030 last, which Viberg jealously protects through trademarks. This hybrid identity is difficult to replicate. In that sense, their buyers are paying for something closer to design and cultural positioning, not just durability. In summary, whether Viberg represents value today depends on the buyer's priorities. Viberg are good value if you care about long-term durability and premium materials coupled with unique heritage styling and North American manufacturing. It is less compelling if you prioritize pure price to performance, functional durability alone, and you don't care for aesthetic differentiation. From a purely utilitarian perspective, Viberg boots are no longer the obvious value leader. But from the perspective of craftsmanship, materials, and design identity, they do remain one of the most distinctive products in the global heritage footwear market. If you buy Crockett & Jones, if you buy John Lobb, why not Viberg? Viberg's evolution tells a broader story about how heritage brands need to survive in the modern market. What began as a practical manufacturer of rugged work boots has become something closer to a luxury craft label built around a single iconic pattern, the service boot. In pursuing refinement, sleeker lasts, rarer leathers, and boutique collaborations, Viberg has undeniably moved away from the rough-edged identity of a P&W work boot maker. Yet the core of the product remains the same: heavy leathers, stitched-down construction, and a design born from real labor. Whether the modern boot represents value is ultimately a matter of perspective. As a pure work boot, it's bloody expensive. As a piece of high-end footwear that still carries the DNA of industrial North America, it occupies a space that few brands fill. Viberg may no longer sit squarely in the traditional logging boots and lineman's gear, but neither has it become a traditional European dress shoe maker. Instead, it exists in that space between where utility, heritage, and luxury meet. So tell me what you think. I'm sure the comments are about to blow up, but perhaps include something in your comments that say if you own a pair or not, and why you will or will not buy a pair of Viberg boots. And while you're blowing up the comments, don't forget to click on like and subscribe. Join this crazy love of heritage boots and watch more of my videos as they come up. Most of them are reviews. Most of them aren't these philosophical tours. I'm back next week, so take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you again soon.